The Ready, Set, Grow podcast is sponsored by Ag Expert, software designed for Canadian agriculture. Visit them today at agexpert.ca.
Welcome to the Ready, Set, Grow podcast, where we like to showcase startup and early stage companies, as well as visit with innovators in the agriculture and food industry. Today, we're here with Joe Dales, co-founder at RH Accelerator, and special guest Randall Schwartzentruber, co-founder and CEO at BinSentry. Randall, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. As you mentioned, I am Randall, co-founder and CEO of BinSentry. I have been running this company now and founded it about 3.5 years ago, right here in southwestern Ontario. Grew up in New Hamburg, spent a lot of time on my grandfather's farm growing up, which is kind of where I first got introduced to agriculture, but ended up taking a pretty different path in life in terms of career. Ultimately sort of found myself in the role of automation programmer / engineer / sort of system design stuff. And that is, in fact, where I first heard about the opportunity to found BinSentry. So I come from an interesting career with a little bit of agricultural sprinkling on top of that. But I would say at heart, I'm probably still a nerd in spite of the fact that I found myself here today.
Well, that's terrific. So I just want to dive a little deeper. What specifically did you take in university, and what kind of background sent you up to do an ag tech company?
Yeah, so coincidentally in university, I took something very different to what I am ultimately doing today. I actually took theology. So I was doing some youth ministry at one point in my past, really enjoyed it. Still today, love investing in the lives of young people. And now obviously it looks a little bit different. I get to invest in the lives of people in our business and in our community. But I was doing that for a good period of time. Always have sort of had a very diverse set of interests and passions. Technology has always been one of them. So in any career that I've ever done, I've looked for sort of opportunities to optimize and introduce efficiencies. And so even while doing sort of youth ministry, it was always like trying to figure out how I could optimize things and use technology to kind of make workflows smoother. Ultimately, I ended up sort of stepping away from that and more towards a technology-focused career, which was the automation thing. Did some schooling to get certified for that, and then moved into that line of work. But it's been sort of an interesting path. But ultimately today, as I play the role of CEO in a company, it's sort of cool to see how, looking back, all of those diverse experiences and jobs that I've done in my past have kind of uniquely qualified me or positioned me to be able to navigate what is an ever-changing sort of career. Joe, you would know, having been a CEO in the past, there's like a new challenge, a new fire to deal with every single day, and you've got to have emotional IQ to know how to deal with the personal challenges, and you've got to have a technical IQ to know how to deal with the tech side of things. And so looking back, it's kind of been an interesting mishmash of experiences that have ultimately led me to where I am today. But again, going to school, that certainly was not the thing that I thought I was going to end up doing, is running a tech company as a CEO someday down the road. But I got to say, I love it. I love where I am today. And I love how all of those experiences now, are sort of drawn upon to kind of look forward and figure out how to do this thing. Obviously, being a CEO, there's not many ways that you can learn that unless you're talking to lots of other CEOs or just kind of forging a path on your own. But yeah, it's definitely a unique set of experiences that have sort of brought me to where I am today.
Oh, good. So tell us a little bit about the company, the products you're offering, the services you're offering. If people haven't heard of it, just give us the elevator pitch.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when I was doing that automation career that I just spoke about a couple minutes ago, not more than 4.5 years ago, I was very happy. To be honest, I thought I would probably never leave that career because it ended up being just such a strong fit. It was amazing what I was doing on a daily basis, until I heard from a feed mill owner locally that he had this unique challenge that he faced at his mill on essentially a daily basis, and which he claimed was a universal problem. Naively at that point in time, I sort of assumed, how many truly universal problems are there in the world that have yet to be solved? And so I was a bit of a skeptic when he told me that this is a problem that feed mills face on a daily basis. My response to him, I'll always remember this, was, give me, a couple hours on Google tonight, and I will find the solution that you're looking for. Surely it's out there. It's probably just that you haven't looked hard enough. And so that night, literally went home, spent 4 hours on Google, searching for the solution that would solve his problem. And the problem, as he described it to me, was basically a supply management problem. Feed mills on a daily basis produce, huge amounts of feed, custom blends for each individual farm that they're servicing. They then take that feed that they manufacture, put it in the back of a delivery truck, in some cases, multiple deliveries. And then those trucks have to drive out to the farms and deposit all of that feed inside of the feed bins. Once the feed is inside of those feed bins, the feed mill now no longer has good visibility into how much product is remaining. So once it's in those bins, obviously livestock inside of those barns start consuming the feed, and every farm consumes that feed at a different rate. So you can imagine if you're a feed mill who's tasked with the responsibility of servicing hundreds or thousands of feed bins, and producing custom blends of feed for every one of those farms, having good and accurate and timely information is of the utmost importance. And so this feed mill owner was sort of lamenting the fact that this is the challenge his mill faces on a daily basis. And the best source of information that he had available to them was literally a farmer equipped with a mallet, pounding on the side of a feed bin on farm and listening for where it sounds hollow and where it sounds solid. And of course, there's a Canadian flavor to this as well. Some farmers don't use the mallet. They literally use a hockey stick to whack on the side of the bins. And that's honestly where their information came from. So after a farmer pounded on the side of the bin, he would listen for how hollow it sounded. He would then have to get on the phone and call his mill up and let them know what his estimate was pertaining to how much product he thought was inside of the bin, which would then equip the mills to do the thing that they needed to do: schedule that particular product, produce it, get it on a truck, and transport it efficiently. So as this feed mill owner described it to me, there really was no good way of getting that information that didn't depend on a human, hopefully, being out at that bin at the time the mill needed them to be out there and capable of effectively estimating how much is inside of this giant opaque bin. It's literally like a scaled up version of the jelly bean game that you've probably all seen at a party, right? Like you have to guess how many jelly beans are inside. Imagine that times 10,000 and trying to guess how much feed is inside of a bin. Difficult problem. So that's the problem he articulated to me. And I thought, surely there's a solution to this particular problem. But when I looked on Google, the only options that were out there were these sort of archaic, extremely expensive, extremely difficult to install solutions that no mill was ever going to be able to afford and deploy en masse. I mean, there's load cells, which you might be familiar with. You can jack up a bin and put scales underneath each leg. And that really was one of the best options. Being sort of a tech nerd, as I already said, I recognized that there was an opportunity here to be building a technology that falls into the category of IoT. And that really is what sort of set us out on this journey, is that conversation I had with that feed mill owner, going on Google and believing I would find something, only to discover that really there was not a solution out there that adequately solved this problem. And that's sort of where the genesis of BinSentry began.
Can you take us a little bit through the just technology that you're using? I'm kind of interested in it.
For sure. Yeah. So, I mean, I always sort of joke, and I'm stealing this quote a little bit from Thomas Edison, but I joke that the reason why we've been able to solve this problem where lots of other companies have not is that we know all 250 ways to fail. And that is truly the process that we went through in the early stages of building BinSentry. It was sort of, a process of finding a new technology that might be able to solve this problem, deploying it in a bin, only to find out that it wasn't actually, adequate for delivering the information that we would need from within that bin. And we must have iterated through literally hundreds of different variants of prototypes, every single one of them, showing some promise, but then ultimately failing for a different reason. The inside of a feed bin is an incredibly difficult environment to be operating in. There's dust, it's pitch black. There's all kinds of other factors that come into play: humidity, feed flow issues, you name it. And a lot of the sensors that are out there on the market today can sort of deliver you a small piece of the total snapshot of information that you would need in order to get accurate information about how much product is inside of that bin. We ultimately sort of worked our way through each and every one of those, encountering all of the different challenges and factors that ultimately led to those technologies failing, only to realize that if we were going to solve this, we were going to need to come at it from an approach that, no one else had tried previously. We would have to literally build something new. And so that's when we started to look at some other emerging technologies on the market that we knew were being used with success in other industries, but in their current iterations were expensive because they were still fairly new. They weren't as widely adopted, or they were complex types of sensor technologies. And then what we did is we said, could we use some of those new technologies and pare them down to sort of the bare minimum that we would need them to be to operate inside of a feed bin? And so one of the technologies that I'm talking about is LiDAR sensors. LiDAR sensors sort of found their first and most major application on self-driving cars. And in self-driving car, in that particular application, they're having to operate at hundreds of frames per second because they're, determining the distance between cars in front of you at 100 to 120 kilometers an hour. So they need to be quick. They need to be taking lots and lots of images in order to automatically apply the brakes. But we're just looking at stationary feed inside of a feed bin. So a high frame rate and an extremely wide field of view. These are things that we could afford to sacrifice on to get access to a really, really good technology with a wide field of view, but specifically tailored to the application that we were trying to solve. And so we began the process of sort of developing our own custom LiDAR sensor. There were other challenges as well, as I mentioned, which is dust inside of a bin. So we also had to keep this optical sensor with lenses on it free from dust, right? Otherwise, the sensor becomes inoperable in a span of like 2 or 3 weeks. And so that was another challenge that we had to overcome. And I actually have a sensor sitting right here. This is the solution. It's there's a reason why it's been on automobiles for the last 100 years. It's because
Perfect.
it works fairly well, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, there are things that we don't love about it. Anytime you can get away from a mechanical solution, that's good. And so we continue to innovate and look at new and interesting options for eliminating the wiper. But as I said, it works. And so we sort of began this journey of figuring out what are all the possible things that could cause us to fail here, and how do we overcome those things. So the sensor that we've gone to market today with is in fact that LiDAR sensor. It is fully commercialized. We've got lots of customers using it with a high degree of satisfaction, but we also recognize that there's an opportunity to get even better here. And so we've got a version 2 sensor that's currently in development as well. It is going to deliver us literally 9,000 times the accuracy. And so yeah, that's obviously very exciting as well. It's a project that I can't say a whole lot about. Probably if we would have done this interview, 1 month from now, I could share a whole lot more information. But it's going to be released fairly soon. It's in the final stages of prototyping with a bunch of our customers, and it's definitely going to put BinSentry into a pretty elite tier, and it'll make it very difficult for anyone trying to follow in our footsteps to be competitive unless they're doing something similar.
Good for you. Good for you. So clients, Randall, farmers, feed mills, and how do clients find you and source you? Do they buy direct? Like, what's your go-to-market strategy?
Yeah, that's a great question. So this is kind of where we flip things upside down as well, as far as types of go-to-market strategies that I would say are typical in agriculture. What we heard from our earliest customers again and again, as we were sort of developing this product, and as we were in the early days of BinSentry, is that ultimately what a feed mill was after, if you boil it right down to the base, was data that they needed in order to be more efficient. And one thing that they didn't want, nor were they experts in, is maintaining or installing hundreds or thousands of pieces of hardware, right? Essentially, what our sensor is a miniature computer. And a lot of these companies may have an IT department, but the last thing they want to do is task that IT department with maintaining and managing and installing, 1,000 more computers in addition to the 10 that they're already struggling to manage in their offices. And so we needed to come up with a solution, a model that would enable them to get access to that data without having to then own the potential headaches that come along with owning hardware. As I said, installing that hardware, maintaining that hardware, dealing with hardware obsolescence, which is a major thing that a lot of companies don't want to have to deal with. And then, of course, there's the fact that you're then owning a depreciating asset, which no one really wants to do. And so the model that we ultimately came up with was an as-a-service model where we deliver the data to our customers, who I should be very clear are feed mills typically, or vertically integrated companies. In some cases, large producers also qualify as a large enough customer that it makes sense for us to move forward. But yeah, we offer essentially bin monitoring as a service, similar to software as a service, hardware as a service. We offer that data as a monthly service, as well as all of the software and the rest of the things that typically come along with Internet of Things solutions. That is all included in the monthly package. And then our customer obviously doesn't have to own the hardware, doesn't have to worry about installing the hardware, and essentially has a lifetime warranty. So that has proven to be a fairly attractive model, if not a little bit unorthodox. So I would say the biggest challenge that we've faced as we've taken that model to the greater market is sort of helping them to understand that this is actually better for them, in spite of the fact that it's not like how they're used to buying things. So that probably has been the biggest challenge, is sort of helping them to work out the total cost of ownership over a certain period of time, and ultimately drawing the same conclusion that we, which is that this is better for them. We're the experts in the sensor. Let us install and maintain the thing. And then not only that, if the sensor doesn't operate, as promised, if it fails because of technology reasons, we're the ones who are ultimately accountable for that failure. And it's not a failure that's left on the shoulders of our customers. So all in all, I think if you can get customers to the point that they recognize this is good, then yeah, you are likely to have a very satisfied customer moving forward.
Good for you.
Yeah. Yeah, Randall, could you take us through a bit of your fundraising journey over the last few years? I know you recently raised about $10 million, and
Yeah.
just sort of that process, and I guess what happens after.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I mean, we, as many startups, sort of did the whole seed capital thing by going to family and friends, and we also raised some capital from an incredible local company here in Kitchener-Waterloo called Garage Capital, and we've also benefited from the mentorship of the guys running that company as well, Mike McCauley, Mike Litt, Devin Galloway. Two of those guys are founders of Vidyard, which is another highly respected company here in Kitchener-Waterloo. And so, in the early stages, we were able to demonstrate that there is truly a market here. There's a need for this type of technology. And because of that, we were able to elicit some buy-in from a number of, people that had capital available. And one thing I would say, and I think this is probably a mantra by which a lot of startups could live by if they want to be successful. In fact, we talked about Y Combinator a little bit before we went on air here, and I think they also promote this. It's this concept of being relentlessly resourceful. That is potentially the most important quality that a startup can have, is maximize how far you're able to take the limited funds that you raise in the early stages of your company. You're going to minimize your dilution that way, and you're going to maximize your returns that way. And I would say that if there's one thing that ultimately contributed to BinSentry's success, it was that ability to be extremely resourceful with the funds that we did have available in the early stages, which then enabled us to not only develop an MVP, but also build a pretty strong customer base by the time that we were then going to raise our Series A. When we raised our Series A, we sort of had the benefit then of having a lot of leverage in that discussion with investors, because we could point to, a really happy customer base, low churn with regards to customers. In fact, to this point in time, we've had no churn. And part of that is a function of, having fairly long contracts as well. But all of our customers also say that they're happy, which is a good sign. But I would say that the sort of takeaway here is if you're in a good position after, working your way through that seed series capital that you've raised, you're going to be far better positioned for raising that Series A. And we had the benefit of going into that Series A raise with a really solid track record to point to. And for that reason, we were able to also secure some really strong investors in Lewis and Clark Capital, which is primarily focused on ag tech, based out of St. Louis, and then also the BDC Industrial Innovation Fund here in Canada, which also has a similar focus. As we raised that Series A, we spent a huge amount of time, qualifying investors and making sure that who we were talking to were companies that were going to actually be able to add value to the company and not just sort of, tell us to pivot towards straight up SaaS models, not fully understanding, how agriculture operates, for instance. We needed people that understood ag so that the advice that they ultimately, would give us moving forward as we brought those investors onto our board was advice that was in line with, what the expectations of the greater industry would be of really a tech company that's been transplanted into ag. And that really is one of the biggest challenges. I mean, you can have ag companies from within ag that start to build tech, or you can have tech companies that sort of move into ag. And I would say that we're probably more the latter than the former. And so we've made a really high priority of listening to people in ag so that we can learn as much as we possibly can in as short a period of time. We never assume that we know better than our customers do, and instead we just sort of take a listening and learning posture. And we kind of also looked for that same character, quality in investors that we wanted to invest in the company. So yeah, we ultimately raised, as you mentioned, Michael, a $10 million Canadian Series A. We're putting that to good use now. So in the last 5 or 6 months, we've doubled the size of our company in terms of employees. We're starting to look globally at sales. And obviously, we also announced a partnership, commercial distribution agreement with Cargill, which has been instrumental in helping us grow over the past little while as well.
Oh, congratulations. It's tremendous progress and exciting to see, um, you know, companies and leaders like you drive forward. What if people want to get involved and learn more about the company, websites, how do they engage with you?
Yeah. So do you mean customers or just like prospective employees?
Anybody,
Yeah.
anybody, all the stakeholders.
Yeah, so that's a great question. I mean, obviously, podcasts like this are a great way for us to, let people know what we're all about.
Mhm.
So we've tried to use those to our advantage to kind of get the message out there about what we're doing and what we're building. Our website is www.binsentry.com, and we're getting a fair amount of traffic on there as well. Especially as I mentioned, as news of a Cargill partnership is announced or news of our Series A financing got some really strong traction as well. But I would say, to be honest, that the most effective sort of marketing benefit that we've had comes from word of mouth. And I would say that potentially more than anything else is true. At least this has been my observation in agriculture. It's a close knit community, and that's phenomenal. It's one of the reasons why, as a tech transplant into agriculture, we have enjoyed this, journey of building this company as much as we have. Is that once you're welcomed in and you demonstrate that you're not trying to steer the ship yourselves without any knowledge of how ag works, but instead you're sort of deferring to the knowledge that you're gleaning from other people, you'll find that you're warmly welcomed. And people really want to collaborate and work together more so than in any other industry that I've ever seen, which I think is probably one of the best qualities of ag is that it's highly collaborative. And we've no doubt benefited from that. So as we sort of invite other people to collaborate with us and work with us to build the best possible technology that we can build, that generates a lot of excitement, and word of mouth really starts to travel. That, hey, if you haven't talked to BinSentry, you should talk to them because like they're super interested in solving whatever challenge you may have. Right now, they're focusing on being the best in the world at bin monitoring, but they're super interested in hearing about other things because they know lots of other companies and they can direct you to the right one, or they might even like consider moving into that space in the future. And so there's an excitement around that type of innovation and that type of collaborative environment if you can create it. And as a result, word of mouth has really been one of the best ways that people have ultimately ended up coming and finding us.
You have a lot of entrepreneurs and I guess young entrepreneurs and farmers watching the podcast. Do you have any advice for people who are starting up business in the agribusiness space?
Yeah. Oh man, where to start? So we obviously are based here in Kitchener-Waterloo, and that collaborative environment that I just talked about is super, super strong here. You can kind of, throw a stone and you'll hit a founder that's willing to sit down and talk with you about how to run a business. And so it's hard to distill 3 years worth of wisdom that's been imparted into just a couple nuggets of good advice. But I think if I had to do that, I sort of touched on one already, and I think it's that concept of relentless resourcefulness. Figure out how to maximize the capital that you have available. And I think that looks a little bit different for every company, but it's a recognition that your development should be product first. And it's an understanding that the customer is more important than anything else. Invite them into your development as early as you possibly can. Again, this is sort of coming from Y Combinator, and I think Paul Graham says it, but fail early and fail well. And what I mean when I say that is don't be afraid of failure, embrace that failure, and then dissect it and figure out what can we learn from this and how can we get better. If you're willing to embrace failure and in fact invite failure in the early stages of your company's growth, you are going to be infinitely better positioned moving forward to mitigate against those potential failures when they're going to cost you a whole lot more money. Again, the relentless resourcefulness, the willingness to fail early and fail well. And then I think the last thing that I would probably say is get a really strong sense of who your company is and what you represent, and fiercely protect that culture. The culture is ultimately what is going to preserve your identity and enable you to really push forward with a strong vision that attracts other people to your cause. So that's both investors, and then also I would say people that might want to come and work with you. It also, I mean, to be honest, is something that curries a huge amount of credibility and trust in your customers. If they know what you stand for and they see that clearly reflected in who you are as a company, I think you build a whole lot more trust that you're going to be a company of longevity that's going to be around 3 years from now and not disappear 1 year from now. Because if you're going to survive, you need to attract the best talent. And the best way to do that is have a strong vision that resonates with people and that attracts other people to your cause. So yeah, I don't know. I hope that's a good job of trying to kind of boil this down into a couple, bite-sized chunks of good advice.
Yeah, it's really difficult to sort of boil it down into like a 20-30 minute chat, because a lot of these things you could just talk about for a few hours and not even scratch the surface.
Well, hey, the one thing I will say is I am so happy to connect with any young founder out there. As I said, we have benefited immensely from having proximity to other founders who have gone through these things in the past. It's super hard to live the life of a CEO because there's really no good way to learn how to do that unless you actually are able to talk to other people who have gone through that journey in the past. A CEO and a founder, right? They're both just roller coaster rides at times, and understanding how to navigate the successes and the challenges is something that I think you can really do better when you have other people at your side who can act as mentors and as just sounding boards for ideas. So I strongly believe in the concept of paying it forward and giving back, and so I try to make myself available to any founders if they ever want to chat about that kind of stuff.
What would be the best way for someone to reach out to you and connect?
Oh, great question. Without broadcasting my email address to the entire world, I would probably say LinkedIn. Shoot me a request on LinkedIn and give a little context in the blurb where you're saying why you want to connect. And yeah, I'd love to connect with people if that's something they're interested in.
Perfect. Before we head out, is there anything else you'd want to share with our listeners?
Oh, man. I don't know. I guess if I had to say anything, I would just sort of say I cannot overstate how important the culture piece is. Although I sort of said that last, I do strongly believe that companies need to stand for something. In this world, which is growing increasingly politicized, people think that it's enough to just kind of, I'm going to use this word, which is a little bit loaded, but virtue signal to the world about, what it is you believe in. What I would say is be what you believe in. Let your actions reflect what you believe in. And don't just post these sort of trite things on social media to let the world know what it is you believe in. And that's going to be the best way for you to make this vision, which as a founder is your responsibility to really cast to the rest of the team. The best way to make that a reality for the people that are joining you is to actually do that thing. And that's the most important thing. I think ultimately it comes down to what you would probably call integrity is your actions aligning with your words. And if you can do that well, you are going to be a person of influence and a person who someone is happy to rally behind, and who wants to unite in this cause. And as you're building a business, that's what you're doing, is you're building something, and you want other people who are intelligent and capable to join that thing. So again, it's culture, it's integrity, it's being the person that you're saying you're going to be, and that's more important than I think anything else when it comes to entrepreneurship, is that integrity.
I just wanted to thank you, Randall, for joining us today and telling us some, I guess, great tips and about BinSentry, and we look forward to sort of watching it in the near future with the, I guess, your new launch you said in a month.
Yep. I appreciate it, guys. I genuinely am grateful that you've brought me onto the podcast today.
Thank you. And I also wanted to thank our listeners for tuning in today. And as always, you can find our podcast at the RH Accelerator website. It's also posted on YouTube and all the major podcasting apps.